Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Gravitas, co-presented by
SBI Mutual Fund, a partner for life.
Chemistry that matters. SABIC. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist. Driven by Kia Sonet. Wild by design.
After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East.
It is no secret that Donald Trump wants a Nobel Prize. His predecessor Barack Obama got one. Trump has been chasing a Nobel for more than 3 years now. Just last week, he was nominated for one. It's for the Abraham Accords. They were signed yesterday. It may not be the deal of the century that President Trump promised, but it is a very big deal. It is Donald Trump's biggest foreign policy achievement in office. 2 Arab countries recognize Israel at the White House. I don't know about the Nobel Committee, but with this deal, Trump has secured a place in history books. Because he has fundamentally changed West Asia as we know it. By delinking Palestine with Israel, Trump is killing 2 birds with 1 stone. This deal is not about Palestine. It's about a new alliance, one that is set to become a strategic nightmare for Iran. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you more about the Abraham Accords. Why is this deal historic? We'll also answer the question that everyone has been asking. Can Donald Trump's peace deal bring peace to West Asia? I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Also on the show tonight, China has a new set of rules to control the private sector. It wants party cells in private boardrooms. Is there such a thing as a private company in China anymore? The FATF meeting ends today. Will Pakistan be blacklisted? Global Voices endorse WION's investigation of Pakistan openly supporting UN-designated terrorists. If you thought drugs had taken over just the Indian national news space, we have some news for you. They're the top headline in the US election too. And Japan has a new Prime Minister. Shinzo Abe's right-hand man, Yoshihide Suga, takes charge. What does his entry mean for India-Japan ties? We'll discuss, but we begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
China has virtually ruled out restoring the status quo ante at the LAC and once again put the onus on India to de-escalate at the border. Reports indicate that there were 3 incidents of firing between Indian and Chinese troops at the LAC within the last 1 month. Meanwhile, Indian Army says if China creates conditions for war, then it will face better trained, better prepared and psychologically hardened Indian troops. Days after scientists detected phosphine gas in the atmosphere of Venus, which indicates the presence of single-cell microbes on the planet, Russia claims that Venus is a Russian planet. Russia says Venus was first explored by the Soviet Union, which remains the only country to land a probe on the planet's surface. Russia has announced the country's space corporation, Roscosmos, would independently explore Venus. Islamabad High Court has issued a non-bailable warrant for former Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. The court has ordered the arrest of Nawaz Sharif before the next hearing, which has been scheduled for the 22nd of September. Former Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif is currently in the UK for medical treatment. Russia will supply 100 million doses of the Sputnik V COVID-19 vaccine to India once it receives regulatory approval. The Russian Direct Investment Fund, RDIF, has announced that it has agreed to cooperate on clinical trials and the distribution of the vaccine with the Indian firm Dr. Reddy's Laboratories. The RDIF has also finalized agreements with manufacturers to produce 300 million doses of the vaccine in India. According to the findings of a UN report on the state of nature, the international community failed to fully achieve any of the biodiversity targets agreed in Japan in 2010. These targets include failure in tackling pollution, protecting coral reefs, and stemming the destruction of wildlife and life-sustaining ecosystems. Hundreds of Hasidic Jews who set off on a pilgrimage despite virus restrictions are stuck at the border crossing between Belarus and Ukraine. This after Belarusian border guards let them through and those in Ukraine refused to let them in. Ukraine had banned the entry of foreigners on the 26th of August for a month after a recent spike in new coronavirus cases. French freediver Arnaud Gérald has broken the world record for the deepest freedive in the bifins category. He achieved the feat off the coast of the Greek town of Kalamata. The 24-year-old descended to a depth of 112 meters, with the dive lasting 3 minutes and 24 seconds. The US-China trade war assumed a new dimension with the World Trade Organization ruling going against the United States. The WTO has ruled that the US violated global trade rules with the tariffs imposed on China by President Trump. Washington can challenge the decision by lodging an appeal at any point in the next 60 days. Meanwhile, China could ask for WTO's permission to recoup some of its losses by imposing tariffs on the United States. The disgraced former chief of the World Athletics body, Lamine Diack, has been jailed after being found guilty of corruption. The 87-year-old Senegalese faced corruption and money laundering charges linked to the Russian doping scandal. Diack was convicted of accepting bribes from athletes suspected of doping to cover up test results and letting them continue competing in events, including in the 2012 London Olympics. He has been sentenced to 4 years in prison, with 2 of them suspended. Diack's lawyers said he would be appealing against the judgment, which they called unfair and inhumane. '19 champion Egan Bernal has withdrawn from the Tour de France after suffering yet another setback during stage 16. Bernal's hopes of back-to-back titles ended on Sunday as he finished more than 7 minutes behind overall leader Primož Roglič. And Bernal lost further time on Tuesday as he dropped to more than 19 minutes behind the yellow jersey. In a statement, Team Ineos said they want Bernal to recover swiftly and reset his goals for the season. The team has come under heavy criticism for dropping former champions Chris Froome and Geraint Thomas for cycling's most iconic race.
A few hours ago, a historic deal was signed. A deal that took more than 70 years in the making. A deal that changes West Asian politics completely and redraws alliances. I'm talking about the Abraham Accords. Sealed in August, signed yesterday. Let me show you a picture. This is the stuff of history books. Weeks before the United States goes to the polls, Donald Trump has pulled off a big foreign policy win. His government has brokered 2 landmark deals. 2 Arab countries have normalized ties with Israel, the homeland of Jews. The UAE and Bahrain are now allies of Israel. Why is this significant? Because for decades, Arabs and Jews were foes. Arab states boycotted Israel. They backed Palestine. They insisted that the Israel-Palestine dispute should be settled first before they recognize Israel as a country. Well, the dispute is far from settled, and here we are. The UAE and Bahrain have done it. More Arab states are expected to follow suit. Donald Trump's deal fundamentally changes West Asia. Until now, only 2 Arab countries had ties with Israel. That's Egypt and Jordan. Now we have 4. The UAE and Bahrain, as I said, have normalized ties with Israel. This is very significant, although not quite the deal of the century yet, the one that Donald Trump had promised. He's calling it the dawn of a new Middle East.
We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East. Thanks to the great courage of the leaders of these 3 countries, we take a major stride toward a future in which people of all faiths and backgrounds live together in peace and prosperity.
The Abraham Accords is the most significant diplomatic achievement of Donald Trump. It is named after Abraham, the common patriarch of Jews, Muslims, and Christians. God called him to found a new nation. The Abraham Accord is the beginning of Israel's rapprochement with the Arab world. The Palestinians call it a betrayal. The fact is that these countries have only put on paper the relationship they've had for years. The support to Palestine has long been reduced to political symbolism. Arab countries have had covert dealings with Israel for many years now. Now they'll have an open relationship. They'll set up embassies, open travel routes, and sign business deals. Needless to say, this is a big win for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel welcomed the deal by projecting the flags of all 4 countries on the old city walls in Jerusalem. Netanyahu called the deal a path to peace.
This day is a pivot of history. It heralds a new dawn of peace. For thousands of years, the Jewish people have prayed for peace. For decades, the Jewish state has prayed for peace. And this is why today we're filled with such profound gratitude.
Let's now talk about Bahrain and the UAE. Both are allies of Saudi Arabia and now friends of Israel. Bahrain and the UAE stand to gain a lot from this deal. For the UAE, it means a halt to Netanyahu's annexation plans in the disputed West Bank. The UAE would like the world to believe that it has taken care of Palestinian interests. It can also access advanced American weaponry, like the F-35 jets. Same with Bahrain. It can now buy high-tech Israeli weapons. But here is the biggest prize, a stronger alliance against Iran, a common enemy of all these countries. The United States is orchestrating a big shift in this region. Donald Trump says the UAE and Bahrain, these deals are just the beginning. He expects more than 5 countries to recognize Israel now.
It's historic. It's a very historic deal and will become more and more historic when other countries join, which they're going to. I can tell you from personal knowledge, 5, 6, even 7 are wanting to get in and get something signed really quickly. So it's something that we should all be very proud of.
5 to 7, he said. That's the estimate from Donald Trump. What does this mean? It means the Israel-Palestine conflict no longer dictates the terms of engagement in West Asia. It is not about Jews versus Arabs anymore. It is now sectarian. It's Shia versus Sunni. This has morphed into a new battle. Iran is on one side, the Gulf, Sunni Gulf states, and Israel on the other. Iran can count on Turkey for support, perhaps Pakistan, which doesn't back this deal, but it is indebted to the Saudis, and its support doesn't matter anyway. What does Pakistan bring to the table? So here we have it, a new matrix. Israel is now recognized by Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, and Bahrain, 4 countries. Next in line are these: Saudi Arabia, a very strong possibility and a very significant one too. It is already cooperating with Israel against Iran. Reports say Bahrain signed the deal only after a nod from the Saudis. But Saudi Arabia itself signing such a deal is an entirely different affair. Israel is still political kryptonite for MBS. The Americans are hard at work. Then we have Oman. It congratulated Israel and the UAE on their agreement. Oman has often played the role of an interlocutor between Israel and the Arab world. It could easily formalize the ties and take the relationship, the partnership, to the next level. Beyond West Asia, names of African countries like the Sudan and Morocco are also doing the rounds. So Israel looks all set to make windfall gains on the diplomatic front. What happens to Palestine? The Palestinians are angry. They're protesting. They say this agreement should not be called a peace deal because it has no representation of Palestine. The fact is that the world is calling it a peace deal. The question is, will it bring peace? There is no doubt that this deal is a win-win for all the parties involved. But it may not end the spiral of violence. Our next report tells you why.
It was almost 3 decades ago that Israel established ties with an Arab neighbor.
After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East.
On Tuesday, it made 2 more friends. The South Lawn of the White House witnessed a historic event, the signing of the Abraham Accords, brokered by America. West Asia has realigned. Israel, the chief benefactor of this new deal, is promising peace.
The blessings of the peace we make today will be enormous. First, because this peace will eventually expand to include other Arab states, and ultimately it can end the Arab-Israeli conflict once and for all.
The pitch is appealing, but the Palestinians aren't buying it. They say they are getting the short end of the stick. As leaders gathered in Washington, people in Ramallah took to the streets. They say the Abraham Accords awards Israeli occupation. The Arabs see this anger and they are trying to strike a balance. The foreign minister of the UAE chose his words carefully. He backed a 2-state solution, even when the phrase seems to be losing diplomatic currency.
The United Arab Emirates believes that the role of the United States in the Middle East is positive, and this belief is evidenced by the accord that we are signing today at the White House, for which you have taken the lead and will remain a beacon in human history for all peace-loving people around the world. And as for us in the UAE, this accord will enable us to continue to stand by the Palestinian people and realize their hopes for an independent state within a stable and prosperous region.
Tuesday's deal is the first agreement between Israel and Arab states since 1994, the year when Israel established diplomatic ties with Jordan. A union of Israel, UAE and Bahrain, alongside the United States, could be a move to contain Iran. With this deal, Israel has joined hands with the Gulf Sunni Arab monarchies. Together, they can take on a common enemy, Iran, that is dominated by Shiites. With the Abraham Accords, US President Donald Trump has managed to build a common regional front against Tehran, a move that only adds more weight to his maximum pressure strategy. Trump's next move could be to add Saudi Arabia into this new alliance. The US president has already promised to bring Riyadh on board.
I spoke with the King of Saudi Arabia. At the right time, I do think they will come in. Yes, I do. This is a very big and very historic moment, and I think everyone agrees to that. But we'll have other countries coming in fairly rapidly.
Palestine doesn't get anything from this realignment. It has been demanding an end to the devastating 13-year-long blockade of Gaza. And with new allies by his side, it doesn't look like Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will concede even an inch of territory. Already, violence is on the rise in the disputed territories. Hours after the deal was signed, the Israeli military carried out a series of air raids on the Gaza Strip. Hamas is threatening to hit back at Israel. The fragile peace in West Asia is facing new challenges. Bureau Report. WION. World is One.
What makes these agreements even more interesting is the timing. In the US, President Donald Trump is trailing in the polls, opinion polls, less than 2 months before the presidential election. And in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing protest over corruption charges and his handling of the pandemic. Both Trump and Netanyahu have a lot to gain from these peace accords. Let's begin with Trump. Point number one, Trump is the man who wants his face carved into Mount Rushmore. He's obsessed with leaving behind a legacy, and this deal gives him exactly that. He gets to be only the third US president to broker a deal between Israel and the Arab world. Jimmy Carter brokered the Camp David Accord between then Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and former Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. And Bill Clinton brokered a deal between then Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Jordan's King Hussein. Trump is the third. What else does he gain? Number two, Trump can call himself the architect of a new political order between Arabs and Jews. Trump's presidency has placed a lot of importance on trying to strike peace deals and broker them. The one with North Korea fell apart, unfortunately, but this one gives Trump a much-needed boost in the election season. He is the president who delivered on a promise, who put peace over military intervention. He always pitched himself as a great deal maker. Now he can say he proved it. Number three, Trump gets international support. He claims that 5 to 6 other Arab nations will join the circle of peace. So it is in the interest of West Asia that Trump remains in power. The region is likely to tilt towards Trump over Biden. In fact, it's already happening. Did you know that Netanyahu flew back to Israel without meeting Biden? Gain number 4 in our list for Donald Trump. Look at the last line of the Abraham Accords. I'm quoting, "We are encouraged by the ongoing efforts to consolidate and expand such friendly relations based on shared interests and a shared commitment to a better future." Well, one of the shared interests is Iran. What America gains from this peace alliance is a united West Asia against Iran, a country that Trump has been calling the biggest exporter of terror. This deal is a big win for Donald Trump. Let's talk about Netanyahu as well. He's fought 3 elections in 1 year. He failed to win any of them with a decisive mandate. He's running a precariously formed government. The Israeli Prime Minister desperately needed a victory of some sort, and he got one. And this is huge. Netanyahu is at a critical juncture in his political career. He has a difficult alliance with his election rival. He has been indicted on corruption charges. He faces protests for his handling of the pandemic. Even as he was flying to Washington to sign the Abraham Accords, protesters had gathered at the Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. But with this deal, he's only the third Israeli leader to sign a peace deal with the Arab world. Like I said earlier, Menachem Begin signed a peace treaty with Egypt in 1979. Yitzhak Rabin signed one with Jordan in 1994. It is 2020 now, and Netanyahu has normalized ties with not one, but 2 Arab countries. And that is not even the cherry on the cake. When it comes to Palestine, Netanyahu gets to eat his cake and have it too. He gets to keep the promise to annex West Bank. And at the same time, he gets to have cordial relations with the Arab world. Within hours of the agreements being signed at the White House, you had a prominent Saudi cleric softening his stand on Israel and calling for Muslims to, quote-unquote, avoid passionate emotions and fiery enthusiasm towards Jews. Listen to this.
God Almighty said, "Accompany them in this life with kindness, and peace be upon him," abluted from a non-believer's water, and died with his shield mortgaged with a Jew. And he treated the Jews of Khyber equally and treated his Jewish neighbor well, prompting him to convert to Islam.
Now, talking about immediate gains, The peace agreements allow Netanyahu to improve Israel's economy at a time when his country is dealing with 18% unemployment. Israel's tourism sector will get a boost, as will energy, healthcare, culture, technology and environment. Israelis will now be able to board direct flights to the UAE and Bahrain. Until recently, Israel was recognized by only Jordan and Egypt in the Arab world. Now we have two more on the list, and if Trump is to be believed, some others will follow suit. It's a win-win for all those who signed the accords. For the longest time, the Chinese economy was seen as a bubble that never pops. That changed with the Wuhan virus. In the month of May, we saw Beijing abandoning a GDP target for the first time in decades. That doesn't mean China will stop fudging numbers. It wants to show economic recovery, and it is using this crisis to establish tighter control over private companies. The Communist Party is now invading China's boardrooms. Our next report tells you how.
The Communist Party is everywhere in China. It has complete control over the country, the military, the police, even the media. But when China opened up its economy through reforms, it seemed like the private sector will follow a different path. A path where market forces will dictate the rules, the government will take a backseat. That is about to change. The Communist Party now wants to tighten its grip over the private sector too. Beijing has issued new guidelines. The role of the United Front is being expanded. While the specifics are sketchy, this is a clear move to deeply integrate the Communist Party into China's boardrooms. The United Front is a department in the Communist Party. It is an umbrella organization designed to increase the influence of the Communist Party both inside China and outside. This decision may be new, but the practice is old. China's private sector has been under siege for some time now. Xi Jinping has pushed for something called comprehensive party building in the private sector. This means setting up party cells in private enterprises. The rules have been in place since the early 2000s. By 2016, 68% of China's non-state enterprises had set up party cells. Even foreign firms cannot escape the Communist Party. 70% of foreign companies in China had a party cell by 2016. This has not gone unnoticed. In 2017, a trade group in Germany raised red flags. It said foreign firms may pull out of China over Communist Party pressure. But China has not relented. Now it is making fresh moves to control the private sector. A party cell is China's way of co-opting the private sector. One can expect these cells to now closely work with the United Front. A report by the Chinese state wire service Xinhua said this: strengthening the United Front work with the private sector is an important way to realize the party's leadership over the private economy. Beijing is sending a clear message to all business leaders: the party is supreme. The private sector accounts for 60% of China's economic output. It creates 80% of the jobs in urban China. Already, private companies like Huawei and Tencent are facing bans and business losses due to the Chinese state. Now, with its latest move, the Communist Party is further blurring the line between private and public. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Let's talk about Pakistan. The two-day FATF meet will end today. That's the Financial Action Task Force, the global terror financing watchdog. It's meeting to review Pakistan's non-existent progress. What is Pakistan doing? Making last-ditch attempts to avoid getting blacklisted. The President of Pakistan, Dr. Arif Alvi, called a joint sitting of Parliament today. On the agenda was an FATF-related legislation. The session lasted for 6 hours. It concluded with the passage of an anti-terrorism bill, a last-minute bill aimed at impressing the FATF by portraying how Islamabad is cracking down on terror funding. The Pakistan government spoke about the steps it has taken to curb terror. During the question hour in the Senate, the Interior Minister of Pakistan shared details of how his office had frozen the properties of several UN-designated entities. Pakistan claims to have frozen more than 950 properties and assets of proscribed terror outfits. 57 of these belong to the Jaish-e-Mohammed and a total of 907 belong to the Jamaat ad-Dawa. The properties in question, we are told, include mosques, madrasas, schools, colleges, ambulances, dispensaries, hospitals, buildings and boats. And they are spread over the provinces of Punjab, Sindh, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Balochistan and POK, Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. The Pakistan government says that all of these properties have now been frozen, which is great. Is this an admission then that terror activities were taking place at all these locations? Because Pakistan has always maintained that no terror-linked activities take place on its soil. Anyway, Pakistan's defense on this front was always punctured. But here's more. Islamabad claims to have frozen the properties of all UN-designated entities. In which case, what about Dawood Ibrahim, India's most wanted terrorist who remains on the UN sanctions list? He is very much in Pakistan. There's more than enough proof of that. But his name does not feature anywhere in the Pak Interior Ministry's list. Why are his properties still operational? In any case, all of this is an eyewash because we've shown you how terrorists have a free run in Pakistan, how they conducted prayer meetings with AK-47s, how they hold terror conferences, recruitment drives, YouTube workshops, fundraisers, and what have you. We've shown you videos as recently shot as last month. How are all UN-designated and sanctioned terrorists flourishing in Pakistan if the government is cracking down so hard on them? We made a case for why Pakistan should be blacklisted by the FATF, and we presented enough proof. And we've been getting endorsements from the world over. We've spoken to various international affairs experts who say that the FATF must blacklist Pakistan. Listen to this.
You know, Pakistan has acted in what it perceives as its own interest. I don't think it's its own interest to support terrorism, or at least to condone terrorism from its soil for, as I said, years or decades now. Whether even something like this will change its conduct, I just don't know. It remains to be seen. It could help, but I can't promise. I don't think anyone could predict for sure how Pakistan's government will react regarding a step such as this. Whether it will bring about the desired conduct in Pakistan, we simply can't be sure.
The constant buildup of evidence that shows this is happening, maybe in some cases it shames them into changing their behavior without blacklisting. But blacklisting is obviously the ultimate hammer that you can use to say the world community can say, we don't tolerate this anymore.
I think Pakistan should be blacklisted because maybe politically something will happen. At least the civil society will have some reaction. I don't think it will stop in any way the terrorist groups. Again, this is not a matter of financing or not financing. It's a political will. Until Pakistan will be ruled by the creators of terrorist groups, there's no chance they will stop.
The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, meanwhile, held a virtual meeting yesterday. The national security advisors of all member states attended this meeting. It was hosted by Russia, which has pulled up Pakistan for quote-unquote diluting the SCO spirit. Let me tell you why. The Pakistani representative, a certain Dr. Moeed Yusuf, deliberately used Pakistan's new political map as a backdrop, a fictitious map which showed Kashmir and Junagadh as Pakistani territory. This was in blatant disregard to SCO norms on territorial integrity. The Indian National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, left the interaction as a mark of protest. This forced the Russian side to reprimand Pakistan. The Russian Foreign Ministry said, and I quote, "Russia does not support what Pakistan has done and hopes Pakistan's provocative act won't affect India's participation in SCO and definitely not cast any shadow on Patrushev's warm and personal relationship with the Indian NSA, for whom he has the highest regard." Some strong words there. We hope Pakistan keeps these words in mind the next time. And speaking of words, Pakistani journalists are being targeted for questioning the Pakistani army. The latest victim is a man called Asad Tur. He works for the Express Tribune in Islamabad. An FIR has been filed against him for allegedly defaming the Pakistan army. The case against Tur is the third such complaint to be registered against a journalist in the last few days. On the 11th of September, Bilal Farooqi, a colleague of Asad Tur, was taken into custody from his home on similar charges. He is now fighting a treason case. And let me tell you this, journalists are not the only ones being targeted in Pakistan. The Shia community is under attack. Look at these pictures. There have been large-scale anti-Shia rallies in several Pakistani cities this month. They're being carried out by hardline Sunni outfits. Thousands are participating in these demonstrations. They're chanting anti-Shia slogans, calling Shia Muslims infidels. What triggered these protests? A new bill that imposes punishments on vilifying Sunni figures. It was passed in Pakistan's Punjab Assembly, and under this bill, at least 40 members of the Shia community have already been booked for blasphemy. This has fueled sectarian tensions across the country. The Shias say the law is being misused. The Sunnis say the law is necessary to protect Islam. We say Pakistan is edging towards chaos. And here's something interesting I'd like to share with you. This weekend, we carried a report on fugitive billionaires that are hiding in Britain from all over the world. We aired it on a series called Gravitas Plus, which is WION's digital exclusive show. Well, it turns out the Pakistani Prime Minister has been watching us, addressing the parliament of his country today. He mentioned our video to further his point on how several financial fraudsters in Pakistan were hiding their wealth in Britain's offshore havens. Well, we're happy that he's watching good content, even though WION remains banned in Pakistan. Listen to what Imran Khan said.
अभी मैं एक YouTube के ऊपर एक वीडियो देख रहा था कि किस तरह हिंदुस्तान में बता रहे हैं कि उनके बड़े-बड़े अमीर लोग जिन्होंने पैसे चोरी किए हुए हैं, वो सब लंदन में बैठे हुए हैं और उनके पास अरबों डॉलर्स की प्रॉपर्टीज और उनकी बैंक अकाउंट्स हैं, लेकिन हिंदुस्तान की हुकूमत के लिए बड़ा मुश्किल है वो पैसा वापस लाना. ये एक ऐसा बड़ा अजाब है, स्पीकर साहब, मैं सिर्फ सबकी इंफॉर्मेशन के लिए बताऊं कि गरीब मुल्क, डेवलपिंग वर्ल्ड गरीब होती जा रही है, अमीर मुल्क अमीर होते जा रहे हैं, क्योंकि हर साल अंदाजा लगाया जाता है कि 1000 अरब डॉलर गरीब मुल्कों से, डेवलपिंग वर्ल्ड से अमीर मुल्कों में जाता है.
He's trying to bracket India with Pakistan, which is a huge mistake. Maybe he should watch the video again. Time for the US election tracker, meanwhile. The United States goes to the polls in just 47 days from now. The question is, who will America elect as its next president? Donald Trump or Joe Biden? Let's look at the headlines to gauge the mood. And this should be interesting, especially for those of you who are watching us in India. The media here is talking about drugs. The press in America, too, is talking about drugs. The only difference is that this is not about film stars. In the US, the focus is on a presidential nominee. His name is Joe Biden. The charge has been made by none other than Donald Trump. He thinks that Joe Biden is, quote-unquote, taking something. And why does Trump think so? Because the president is surprised by Biden's improved stage performance. Trump says during the Democratic primaries, Biden's stage performance was a quote-unquote disaster. And now Trump says Biden is taking something that gives him clarity. It does not end here. Trump wants Biden to undergo a drug test before their presidential debates, which, by the way, begin on the 29th of September. What does Joe Biden have to say on the drug allegation? The Democratic nominee says Trump is a fool and his comments are foolish. We say no comments. Let them sort this out. We'll tell you about a wise move that Trump made. His proximity to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, apparently it's helping him. He may win more Indian American votes compared to Joe Biden. I'm not saying this, a leading American think tank is. The Atlantic Council says the Indian American donors are leaning towards President Trump. This should not come as a surprise. Trump has repeatedly gone out of his way to woo the Indian diaspora. When the Indian Prime Minister visited Houston in 2019, Trump was at the stadium opening the event for Prime Minister Modi. In February this year, Trump visited Modi's home state of Gujarat. The Democrats, on the other hand, rubbed India the wrong way with their position on the Kashmir issue. But they have an edge over the Trump camp when it comes to money. According to one report, Kamala Harris's nomination as the Democratic VP pick has prompted a quote-unquote historic outpour of contribution. The report says around $48 million came in on the first 2 days of the announcement of her candidature. This was in the month of August. In that month alone, the Democrats collected a record amount of $364.5 million. Who is donating to the Democratic camp? Women and Californians who would otherwise avoid shelling out money for Joe Biden, we are told. Earlier this week, Harris attended a fundraiser with Hillary Clinton. That event brought in $6 million from 100,000 people. What about Trump? Well, he's winning more bad press than donations. In focus now is an old trip to France, the one in 2018, the same trip where he cancelled his visit to a cemetery and apparently called the dead US Marines losers and suckers. So what was Trump doing during that extra time that he had from not visiting the cemetery? The president was reportedly admiring the art at the home of the US ambassador to France. Trump liked some pieces so much that he picked them up, loaded them onto the Air Force One, and brought them back home to the White House. Reports claim Trump picked up art worth $750,000. The works include a bust and a portrait of America's founding father, Benjamin Franklin, and figurines of Greek mythical characters. And that's not the whole story. Turns out that the figurines and the bust were not original. They were replicas. One headline read that Trump has a habit of falling for fakes. So there you have old tales and new jokes that just about sums up this American election. To Japan. The new Prime Minister of Japan is being called a self-made man. Yoshihide Suga has no political dynasty to his credit. He is not particularly famous in the political circles of Japan. How then did the son of a farmer reach the highest political office in Japan? And what lies ahead for India's relationship with Japan under this man? This report explores.
Suga Yoshihide-kun 衆議院規則第18条第2項により本院において内閣総理大臣に指名することに決まりました。
He is not a mass leader, nor is he a political dynast. He did not even have much clout in his own party. Yoshihide Suga was an unlikely choice to succeed Shinzo Abe as the Prime Minister of Japan. Yet, he secured an easy victory. Taking 314 votes out of the 462 valid ballots in Japan's parliament.
よって菅 What
set him apart from the rest was his image of a self-made man. This is his story. 71-year-old Suga was born in 1948 to a strawberry farmer and a school teacher in rural Japan. As a child, he was sent to Tokyo to study. In his youth, he worked at a cardboard box factory and as a security guard to pay for his education. And in the late 1960s, he joined a local politician as a secretary. In the next 3 decades, Suga built his political base through his networking skills. In 1996, he finally entered national politics and never looked back. When Shinzo Abe came to power in 2006, he named Yoshihide Suga the Minister for Internal Affairs and Communications. As Abe's right-hand man, Suga built a fierce and humorless reputation. He ruthlessly controlled the bureaucracy and stonewalled the media at daily press briefings. But this stern image was slightly livened in 2019, when Suga was tasked with presenting the new imperial era of Japan. He unveiled the name of Emperor Naruhito's era, Reiwa, which earned him the affectionate nickname of Uncle Reiwa. He soon became a household name, and he is now the Prime Minister of Japan. His task is cut out. He must take Abe's legacy forward. This includes close ties with India. Under Shinzo Abe, the India-Japan friendship witnessed unprecedented highs. When Prime Minister Narendra Modi travelled to Tokyo in 2014, Shinzo Abe elevated Japan's ties with India to a special strategic and global partnership. Japan promised India $35 billion in FDI for 5 years. It built India's first bullet train, with Japan paying 80% of the bill. They signed a pact to use each other's military facilities. And most significantly, crystallized the Quad, a strategic group to counter a belligerent China. Yoshihide Suga is said to be not in favor of creating an Asian NATO. But he has promised to pursue cooperative and strategic relations with India. Suga has a lot to prove in a short time. He faces another leadership vote in October 2021. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Do you think monkeys can click selfies? Turns out they can. Something that recently happened in Malaysia has taken the internet by storm. A monkey stole a phone, clicked a series of selfies, recorded some videos and then tossed the phone in the owner's backyard. The world is going gaga about this shutterbug and his clicks. Take a look.
This video was shot by a monkey. Want to know the story behind it? It happened in Malaysia when a monkey invaded a human house. The creature picked up a phone and took it out for an adventure. The monkey stared at the phone camera, tried eating it, monkeyed around a little, then the primate got bored. So it trashed the phone and disappeared. Enter the phone owner. This guy, he found his cell phone idling away in the backyard. When he went through its media, he found gold. The monkey had left some souvenir. The funny creature had documented its day out, his glands, and left some bite marks on the phone. The overwhelmed owner took to Twitter to express his amusement, where he also swore to have washed his phone 7 times. Now this monkey and the man are trending. They have joined the trending selfie club. Want a sneak peek on the other members? The Hollywood Dog, the Fur Gang Group Fee, the Pretty Ladies, the Drunk Doggo, the Happy Friends, the Camel that loves PDA, another creature that loves sticking its tongue out, and the cat that just saw ghosts. Amused much? We told you, these chaps are taking over Instagram soon. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
What better note to end the show on? We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.